Big Fight. Chapter 9. The next morning, I told Josie, Michael and Tom about the unexpected venture my mum had taken me on, and they all said they wanted to come with me next time and meet the man in the red turban with the king's hearts too. None of them had ever seen the inside of a pomegranate before, so I tried to describe the colour and the shapes of the seeds to them on the bus to school. But they still looked confused, so I drew them a picture of it on the back of my exercise book instead. I think pomegranates are now my most favourite fruit in the whole wide world. Not just because of the way they taste, because of the way they looked. On the outside they look like extra shiny balls that have been dipped into a bucket of sunset colours, like peach and pink and gold. But inside it's even cooler, because when you pull one open, it's like finding a million sparkling red rubies all squashed together inside a round suitcase, bursting to get out. You have to push each one gently, Mum had said, when she had cut mine open and shown me how to pop the seeds out. See? As if you're plucking out jewels from the roof of a cave. She showed me how to peel the skin lying between the seeds too. I didn't like that part so much, because the peeling looked like bits of old snake skin, and that one I'd seen in a zoo once. I meant to give the pomegranate to a new boy at home time, but I was so excited that I couldn't wait until then. So as soon as the bell for the first break began to ring, I hid the pomegranate under my school jumper and hurried into the playground with it. We're not allowed to take food into the playground because we're only supposed to eat snacks in the dinner hall. But I wasn't going to eat or make anyone else eat it, so I didn't think it counted. The new boy followed us out because he knew we were his friends now. He'd stopped disappearing every break time and only went to have the seclusion during lunchtimes. Even Miss Hemsey had stopped coming out during break times and went to the staff room, which I think she meant she knew he had new friends here too. Here, I said, as soon as we got to the corner of the playground, and pulling out the pomegranate from my jumper, I held it out to him. It's for you. Josie and Michael looked at each other, and Tom looked at me. We all waited for the new boy to say something, but he just stared and stared, as if at first at us, and then at the pomegranate, and then didn't say anything. Knew you would have put a sticker on it, whispered Tom, shaking his head. Then, slowly the new boy reached out and took the pomegranate in his hands. Home, he said quietly, his lined eyes getting very big. I have home. Yes, I said. Your home is Syria. I've seen it on the map. You know, map? The new boy fell quiet, and then for the first time since we had met him, he smiled. Not a small smile or a side smile or even a half a smile, but a real proper smile that went from one cheek to another, and which made his eyes smile too. He opened his mouth to say something when, suddenly, Brendan the bully pushed past us. Give me that, he said, and he snatched the pomegranate from Ahmet's hand. Give that back, I shouted, feeling scared and angry all at once. Make me, sneered Brendan the bully as he turned around to face me. I don't know why, but sometimes when someone you don't like looks at you right in the eyes, they suddenly seem to grow taller and you suddenly seem to grow shorter, even when really you're both the same size. Usually it's only for a few seconds, then you grow back to normal height. But sometimes it goes on for so long that you wonder if you'll ever get back to the height you used to be. This was one of those times, when Brendan the bully turned to look at me. He stared me into the eyes so hard for so long that he seemed to grow at least 2 inches taller. But I was feeling so hot and angry I couldn't feel my ears going red, and I didn't care. I took a step forward and tried to grab the pomegranate back. Go on, try again, laughed Brendan the bully, as he whipped it away from me and held it high above his head. I could feel my face getting redder and redder and my legs getting shorter and shorter as I tried to jump and snatch it back from him. Then suddenly he threw the pomegranate to Chris, who was standing behind me. Chris caught it and tossed it up in one hand, waiting for us to try and do something. Josie and Tom and Michael all lunged forward, but Chris was too quick and threw the pomegranate to Liam, who quickly threw it back to Brendan the bully. This might have carried on all break time, because Brendan the bully likes playing this game, and no one had ever beat him at it. But what happened next was so unexpected, so shocking, so fantastic, that even Brendan the bully didn't know what to do. Because suddenly, with a huge roar, Ahmed ran at Brendan the bully like an angry lion, crashed into him with his head. Brendan the bully fell backwards onto the floor, his legs swinging into the air. We all gasped aloud, but Ahmed did not stop there. He jumped on top, his face red and patchy, and punched Brendan the bully as many times as he could, shouting and shouting that none of us could understand. Someone behind us shouted, "Fight!" and everybody in the playground ran over to watch. But this was the most shocking thing of all. It wasn't really a fight. You need two people at least to be fighting for it to be a fight. And Brendan the bully wasn't fighting back. Not at all. Not even for a second. Instead, he was holding his arms over his face as Ahmed continued to shower punches, roaring and shouting with all his might. "Break it up!" shouted a voice in the crowd parted, and Mrs. Irons and Mrs. Sanders came running through, but Ahmed wouldn't stop. He was like a machine that didn't have an off button. He continued to punch and punch and punch, just as hard and fast as he could. "Right, young man," cried Mrs. Irons, and grabbing him by his jumper, Mrs. Irons lifted Ahmed off Brendan the bully, while Mrs. Sanders pulled Brendan the bully back onto his feet. Everyone felt quiet. But I don't know what it was, what we were wondering what was going to happen next, or because none of us could believe that Brendan the bully had actually been hurt. His face was bright red, his eyes red, and his eyes looked watery, and there were tiny stones from the playground floor stuck to the side of his cheeks. With a horrible glint in his eye, Mr. Irons stared down at Ahmed, shouting, "What do you think you're doing, boy?" Ahmed stared angrily at the floor and didn't say anything. "Who started this?" shouted Mrs. Sanders, and was so angry she had forgotten to look over her glasses and was looking at everyone straight through them instead. I immediately pointed to Brendan the bully. So did Tom and Josie and Michael. "Right, all of you move me now," ordered Mrs. Sanders, dragging Brendan the bully by the arm across the playground into the school. Mr. Irons flicked his hand to the pointed to the doors, his nose whistling louder than ever whistled before. I followed Tom and Josie and Michael as we hung our heads and made our way through the crowd. Everyone stared at us, stared at Ahmed. His face was even redder than mine. His lion eyes were so big and wet it looked as if they were drowning. He wiped away an angry tear and looked back over his shoulder. I looked back too and saw lots of bright pink spots all over the playground. The pomegranate had smashed open. Its ruby red seeds had been crushed beneath everyone's feet. After we told Mrs. Sanders all about what happened, she gave me 50 lines to do, taking the bomb out of the playground, and said that Ahmed and Brenda the bully had to write lines every night for the rest of the week with Mr. Irons. We tried to tell her, and Mrs. Khan the fight wasn't Ahmed's fault, and that sometimes hitting someone when they're being horrible and taking something that's yours from yours, you can make them feel 100 times better than just telling the teacher ever would, even 1,000,000 times better. But they just stood there and shook their heads, said that Ahmed should never have hit Brendan the bully. We didn't say anything after that because sometimes you can tell when grown-ups won't listen to you anymore. Usually say, "That's the end of it," or "I've said my piece and that's that." But teachers always say, "That's that. You can leave it now." As we left, I told Ahmed that I was sorry for getting him in trouble and I would try and find another pomegranate for him. All he did was give me a nod and a thumbs up. I think this was his way of telling us not to worry about being able to roar like a lion on top of the bully was worth doing the lines for, even if it was hundreds of them, in a language he didn't know how to speak yet. As we went home that afternoon, we talked about the big fight and how Ahmed was going to be famous, first boy that ever beaten up Brendan the bully. "You wait and see," said Tom. "Everyone's going to want to be his friend now, even the cool kids." I guess Tom was right, but he made me feel sad. If Ahmed made friends with the cool kids, that meant he wouldn't be able to talk to us or play football with us anymore. There's a law that says cool kids can't ever hang out with the other cool kids, and that they mustn't ever talk to us, except for when they put in a group with us by a teacher. I don't know about the law, but Michael knows all about it, and I guess his mum must have told him. But it turned out Michael's wrong about the law, because Ahmet never stopped being our friend, not even after he became the most popular boy in school for beating up Brendan the bully. And now, and not even when all the newspapers in the world made him the most famous refugee boy on the planet.